Welcome to today's webinar, Creating a Safe Space for Diverse Voices to be Heard and Grow Leadership. I'm Oryx Cohen, and I'll be helping out with moderating, and I'm with the National Coalition for Mental Health Recovery. We're proud to host this webinar, which is sponsored by Surviving Race, the intersection on injustice, disability, and human rights. As I said, we're very proud to be able to host this webinar to celebrate Black History Month. And without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Jen Padron from Surviving Race. Actually, just real quickly before that, as you come on and folks are trickling in, you'll see that you have a control panel and you can ask questions. And we encourage you to ask questions or make comments through that question function on your control panel. At the end of this webinar, we're going to have a discussion dialogue Q&A period, and that's very important to us. So please feel free to ask any questions you may have or post any comments using that question function. And we'll remind you about that as we go along. So Jen Padron is going to kick us off. Jen is from Surviving Race and a friend and a colleague. So Jen.
Yes, hi, Oryx. Thanks so much, and I want to say welcome to everybody, and thank you for joining us here today, and a big thank you to the National Coalition on Mental Health Recovery. I'm pleased to introduce Celia Brown. Celia is a longtime activist in the consumer survivor movement. She was instrumental in developing the first peer specialist civil service title in the country and the first peer specialist in New York. She served as a main representative to the United Nations of Mind Freedom International, and she has collaborated with other disability organizations on the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. She's a founding member of Surviving Race, the intersection of injustice, disability, and human rights. She currently works as a regional advocacy specialist at the Office of Mental Health, and I'm pleased and proud to call Celia my friend and colleague and comrade. Celia?
Thank you so much, Jen, and thank you, Oryx, and thank you to the National Coalition on Mental Health Recovery. I wanted to give our audience, explain a little bit about what Surviving Race is. So, Surviving Race, and we call Surviving Race for short, instead of the whole name, which is Disability, the Injustice, Disability, and Human Rights. We just, for short, say Surviving Race. We started Surviving Race in 2014. And the reason why we started it is because at this time, there were a lot of police killings of young Black men. And I was getting really afraid seeing this on social media, seeing this on television constantly, that I said, we have to do something. And who better to do something about it is the consumer survivor peer movement, as we've been working on so many issues over the years and working on human rights. And I started to worry because I'm a mother of a 24-year-old young man, Kevin. And I started to worry about him. I started to worry about my nephews and cousins and what were they going through. So can you go to the next slide, Oryx? Next one. Okay, so we got together on a conference call and we decided what we wanted to do as a movement and also name what the coalition, which is Surviving Race. We worked on this mission statement for a while, but I think that it's a great mission statement of what we do. So just to read a little bit of it, is to create and support local and national psychiatric survivor and human rights movements that are creating opportunities for involvement in anti-racist activities that expose and eliminate police killings, police brutality, and mass incarceration generally, and specifically as they relate to psychiatry and mental health. We aim to shut down the pipelines that funnel people, and disproportionately people of color, starting in preschool directly into foster care systems, mass incarceration, and psychiatric confinement. So because we're in the social media, era, we created a Surviving Race Facebook page. We have over 600 members. And our members consist of survivors, activists, mental health workers, anyone that's advocates, and anyone who's interested in fighting, police brutality, and really exploring the intersection of injustice, disability, and human rights. So we post every day on Surviving Race. You can become a member on the Facebook page. We have a conference call every Sunday of the month at 4 p.m. Eastern, where we discuss activities that we have been doing, any issues that people want to come up with. We just recently did a Surviving Race second edition newsletter, and we're very, very proud of that. And we're trying to do a lot of activities to bring us into the community and into other people knowing about Surviving Race who may not go on Facebook. So we're very excited about that. Over the years, since 2014, we developed, and I know Jen will be talking about some of the memes that were developed. We have been developing, position papers for Surviving Race, memes on Don't Call the Police, and other things that's on our website. And all of the resources are you can download. Next slide. Next one. Next one. Okay. So today I want to talk about some of the people that shaped our thinking during this time when the police shootings were happening. So Trayvon Martin, it was a 17-year-old African-American teenager from Miami Gardens in Florida. And he was fatally shot in Sanford, Florida by George Zimmerman. He had a hoodie on. Apparently, George Zimmerman was startled, didn't know who this person was. But, essentially, he shot an unarmed man. He did go to trial, but no charges were made against him. And today is the day. It's ironic that we're having the webinar today, but February 26, 2012 is when this occurred. So we want to remember Trayvon Martin. He's in my thoughts and hopefully in all our thoughts today. The other person in the picture is Michael Brown. I don't know if everyone remembers this, but he was also an unarmed Black teenager, and he was shot and killed on August 9, 2014 by Darren Wilson, a white police officer in Ferguson, Missouri. And at this time, there were many protests. People came out. They were just outraged about this. Ultimately, there was a grand jury trial, and again, nothing happened. He wasn't indicted, and this made the community in Ferguson very, very upset. So this was going on at the time. Next slide. And this is a protest that Jonathan Edwards, Kendall Atterbury, Tracy Puglisi, and myself went December 13, 2014 in Washington Square Park in New York City. And I felt so supported to have my comrades with me. Eric Gardner was also someone who was put in a chokehold. They wanted to arrest him for selling loose cigarettes, and okay, but to put him in a chokehold, and the famous slogan that came out of that from the Black Lives Matter was, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." So we participate in this protest with many people of all races, that this is an outrage, that young Black men of color can't even walk in the street. They're feared, they are presumed dangerous before even knowing who they are. And this is a tremendous amount of cost to the families and to the people of color community and all of our community. We're all in this together. And it causes trauma. It can cause mental health issues. And, people don't think of racism at times as causing trauma, but it does cause trauma. And we really would like this to stop. We need to heal. We need to be looked at as people and work together to change this. The other thing that Surviving Race has been working on, we're a coalition of people, white people, Black people, all Black and brown communities together. We want to show the world that we as a movement can work together to solve some of these issues. And we have the expertise to do it. And we want to be part of other movements like Black Lives Matter and other movements to really intersect and partner with all of us, because this is very, very, it's crucial. And it's even crucial more now that we all stick together and work on ways and creative ways that we can participate in anti-racist activities. So I'm going to stop there, and I want to just say happy Black History Month to everyone. I'm so glad that this is one of the ways to have this webinar to celebrate today, this afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Celia. This is Jen. I'm very happy to introduce Lauren Tenney. Lauren is a member of the Surviving Race group. She's a tremendous social justice activist, teacher, writer, artist, and a filmmaker. I'm pleased to call her my friend, my colleague, and my comrade. She's currently working on this fantastic, exceptional piece of work called American Monster, which you will be seeing quite a bit of in the future. And I'll let her share here. Lauren?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me be part of this today. I'm really honored to be part of this work and think it's incredibly important. I guess that part of what I want to say is that it's really important for organizations to create space for these types of dialogues to happen. But it's also really important for organizations to practice what it is that they're putting out there. And it's really important that organizations are representative of the people that are actually being affected by what's going on. The racist practices of psychiatry in the United States are absolutely out of control. This is both in terms of people of color being grossly overrepresented in services that are court-ordered or involuntary, but also in grossly underrepresented in services that are voluntary in nature. And the ways in which racism plays out in the psychiatric system ranges from what people are diagnosed with, to the types of treatments that they are subjected to the places in which those treatments are carried out on them. And enough alternatives are really not available that are reflective of people who are being court ordered. In New York, for example, African Americans are 5 to 8 times more likely to be court ordered into psychiatric services over whites. This is an extraordinary disparity. Obviously, nobody should be court ordered into services, but the ways in which racism plays out inside of the system are very present. Additionally, within the peer organizations, at the same time that Surviving Race was starting, and over the years that followed, part of what came out was that in addition to police brutality and police killings, that 1 out of every 4 people who are killed by the police are killed on a mental health check or a wellness check, if you will. And so it's really important to call attention to that, and that's part of where the Stop Calling 911 activities of promoting the idea that people shouldn't be calling the police, and that psychiatric professionals should not be allowed to have on their answering machines to call 911 in their after hours. And Jen's going to talk a little bit more about that meme in a little while. The other thing that I just want to really underscore is, again, within the peer movement, one of the things that we called for was for half of the white leadership to step back and create space for people of color to have leadership roles in this movement. And while this webinar is one example of a way to create space, and obviously this is a good thing that the space is being created, simply doing a webinar is not significant enough. And everybody who's working within the peer industries and within the human rights movements really would be wonderful if we could come together more and support other social justice organizations and activities that our movement is really just a microcosm of what's going on in the greater world. And so the kinds of racism and sexism and transphobia and homophobia and gender thinking and issues around oppression on religion and spirituality, and we could go on. These are all very real things in the outside world, and they're all very real things in our movement. And I think that we need to just continue to call attention to and abolish these kinds of activities and really move toward anti-racist work. And so thanks again for having me, and I look forward to hearing what everybody's talking about.
Thanks, Lauren. This is Jen. I'm going to be speaking to alternatives to calling 911, and I'll tell you why. A little bit about myself. I first got my certified peer specialist, my first one, in Texas, in Austin, with the Depression Bipolar Support Alliance, Texas, and DBSA Austin. And at that point, I had a chance to meet a lot of people that changed my life, like Larry Fricks, and especially from Appalachia Consulting, who became instrumental in bringing in the first CPS curriculum for the state of Texas. Since then, I have also acquired my CPS in the state of Georgia. What I want to speak to more than ever right now is my working in local crisis intervention. After my sister died in 2012 from cancer at 53, I left Texas, and I eventually made my way down to Georgia to work with this fantastic group called Benchmark Human Services. And I was given the option of working anywhere in the state of Georgia that I wanted to, but I really wanted to work where it was rural and like frontier-like, because I really liked that, and I had no experience working in rural community public mental health. And so I went to Region 1, and I ended up in a small little town called Toccoa, because there were a lot of houses that were making drugs there, and we needed to base ourselves there in the middle of nowhere. And so I worked in a 14-county Appalachia region in North Georgia, And I learned an awful lot. And I'll tell you what I saw when I was working with crisis intervention. As a certified peer specialist working on the triage team consists primarily, typically, of a licensed clinical social worker or licensed professional counselor, the certified peer specialist, and oftentimes there were maybe two clinicians and maybe myself going on calls, but never alone. It was to people who had expressed in crisis despair. And I learned a lot about despair working there and still today. And so we went to the calls, and because they were contacting the place of contact in Georgia, which is the Georgia Crisis and Access Line, run by Behavioral Health Link, otherwise known as GCAL. So GCAL would route us to call. We would go to the site, on site, and we would be there with the person in crisis. Now, what I learned there is that being a certified peer specialist, being a peer specialist on a mobile crisis intervention team, means that I'm simply, and you will be, and you are probably, only ornamental. I had no option of speaking with the person who was in crisis, who had expressed, intent to self-harm, perhaps talking about suicide, talking about other harm, and they may or may not have had access to means to complete, but we were there to talk to them and find out how we could support them. And my job was to help them, support them, listen to them, but I couldn't intervene because that was the clinician's role. And so ultimately, depending upon the severity of where that person was, they were often taken to the hospital emergency room where that was closest to where they were. And so we would go to the emergency room. They were typically either taken by a police escort, sheriff escort, trooper escort, or an EMT, or family member who at that point wanted to participate. Oftentimes families at that point disappear from the scene. And so at the emergency room, the clinicians would typically speak and triage with the registered nurses in the emergency room and the medical physician on duty. And they would deem that person what's called a 1013 or a 1014, which is either voluntary or involuntary. At that point, a 1013 or 1014 means that they're in it involuntarily. And what that means is that they're routed into the system of care, quote unquote, and they wait for a bed. Depending upon the severity of where that person's at, in their despair, in their crisis, there may or may not be restraints. There may or may not be taking them to another location for detainment. And so that broke my heart. I'll be honest with you. It broke my heart to see that happening to my comrades, because I have certainly attempted suicide in the past. It's how I got into the system myself in the year 2000. And I've had multiple attempts, and I learned very quickly, you don't call 911 because they're going to come and get you, and they're going to take you away in handcuffs, and you're not going to be able to get out of the system. It's tough. It's tough right now. In the state of Georgia, what that looks like for mandatory treatment laws is that civil commitment laws establish criteria for determining when involuntary treatment is appropriate for the individuals with severe mental illness who cannot seek care voluntarily. Oftentimes they're referred to court-ordered treatment in the community. And I often wonder what community means, because what that means to me and what I've seen as meaning community is a hospital, an inpatient psychiatric facility. In Georgia, it's a community service board crisis unit, or to detox in the case of substance use. For inpatient treatment, a person has to meet the following criteria, and they often will be by the notes and the referral from the medical physician in the emergency room. They must be in imminent danger to themselves or others due to recent overt acts or expressed threats of violence. An individual is unable to care for their physical health and safety, resulting in an imminently life-endangering crisis, and they're in need of involuntary treatment. Now, when the person is placed 1013, 1014, that means a 72-hour plus hold. In the state of Georgia, all it takes is two people over the age of 18 to go to a court and say that person's going to hurt themselves or going to hurt someone else, and they're scary, and they're mentally ill, and they're crazy, and they're ill, and they're disabled, and so you need to go and get them into care. So And again, there's an escort to take the person away in handcuffs. And yesterday, a very traumatic thing happened to a friend of mine in the state of Ohio. She was in the main. She was experiencing a manic episode, and she was staying at a friend's house for respite, for peer respite, and she was safe. However, her father and her wife were trying to find her because she was going on 48 hours at her friend's house at the nurse's place for respite, and they eventually sent a mobile crisis team to her house. Now, this may trigger you, so just please be mindful of what I'm about to say. The details are horrendous. This happened yesterday in the state of Ohio. A police officer came who was working on the crisis. I'm assuming it was the CIT team in Ohio. I don't know how that works there, but a licensed clinical social worker was with the police officer, and the wife and my friend's father were there. The police officer and the social worker restrained her they put her in handcuffs, and a body search was done on her. I don't know why. I've never heard of that happening. And so she's been detained since then. We don't know where she's at. But that's what happens right now. It's a terrible climate. And so I guess I just want to say that my ethical dilemma right now is I'm an MSW student at the university here in South Georgia to obtain my own clinical credentials to do social work. And I see what happens as the social workers within these roles, what you need to do for intervention. And I'm having a very difficult time with it. So I look forward to hearing what everybody else has to say. And so you don't have to call 911. Options are that you can contact your friends, call anybody that you trust, please, first. I have trouble with a lot of clinical voicemails to say, in case of emergency, please call 911. Well, you know what? 911 is going to triage you. They're going to come to you. They will take you. And if you're lucky, if you make it out alive, if you're not a person of color, you're in the system again. So that's our system of care right now. And I know it's not very positive. It all sounds very negative, but that's the fact, and that's what's happening now. So it was very upsetting, and it is upsetting to me to see what's happening nationwide with calling 911, for calling for restraints, for calling the 24/7, 365 crisis lines. The suicide hotlines will also refer you to 911, and then 911 is referred over to GCAL, and then GCAL is sent to you. That's the cycle. That's the mechanism. So ending it there for me, for my piece. I get to introduce a gentleman who I just met. His name is Jonathan Philip Edwards. Jonathan is a New Yorker who loves jazz, travel, and good conversation. He works for the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. He consults nationally and internationally on peer workforce implementation and supervision, and also serves on the boards of the New York Peer Specialist Certification and the National Association of Peer Supporters and Mental Health News Education. He states that he hopes that he has hope and peer support will continue to support his ongoing recovery, and he also has helped achieve monumental goals, including preparing for his dissertation defense in the coming months. The hope in this peer work has helped him prepare for this. So I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Jonathan Edwards.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. And Jen, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction and for what you just shared. I don't know if anyone's ever had the experience, but listening to a bio about yourself, I know for me, sometimes it kicks up imposter syndrome, and I ask myself, who's that person they were talking about? And to that note, one of the things that I wanted to sort of incorporate into my very brief talk today was sort of the theme beyond marginalization, sharing the journey from invisibility to empowerment. One of the first things I want to say is that I want to recognize that as survivors of trauma and survivors of violence and survivors of disenfranchisement, to sit at the table today and to be on this webinar really affords us a lot of privilege to get our voices out there and to demonstrate to our peers that, you know, empowerment is not just a possibility, but a probability, you know, if you have a vision and if you have hope. And many of us have done that for each other. So I really wanted to just start out by acknowledging that, and to also say that I'm grateful to be a part of the webinar, this particular webinar in recognition of Black History Month. I want to thank the organizers of Surviving Race and the National Coalition for Mental Health Recovery for hosting this webinar. I was asked to share very briefly about some of the work that I do in the peer workforce community and a bit about my connection with the Surviving Race group. So as you heard earlier from Celia and Lauren and Jen, different iterations around Surviving Race and how it emerged in 2014. It emerged, you know, from grassroots efforts and a lot of passion and phone calls on Sunday afternoons. I mean, you can't get any more devoted than that. And my introduction in 2014 took the form of joining a group of advocates in a picture that you saw a few slides ago. And the tragedy, sadly, will never leave our hearts and minds. The march was really to recognize the tragic, unprovoked, and unnecessary killing of Eric Garner. And so as participants of social change, we have an opportunity to promote awareness, empowerment, and solidarity among our peers and others who are often at risk for disenfranchisement, exploitation, and violence, among many other unfortunate things that we face. So over the past 15 years, I've had the opportunity to promote the value and integrity of recovery and peer support, ranging from large systems change efforts within a large hospital system to serving as director for and providing direct supervision and professional development for almost 30 peer support staff in one of the largest peer support programs in New York City. My current work entails serving on the New York Peer Specialist Certification Board. And since 2015, we've approved certification for approximately 2,200 peer specialists working throughout New York State. However, that number is always growing thanks to the Academy of Peer Services at Rutgers that Amy Spagnolo and Rita Croneiss are involved with, and that provides the platform for the online training and testing for people to qualify for their education. And so because of that process and the partnership with the Mental Health Empowerment Project and the board, we're able to really support the professional development of peers throughout New York State. I also serve on the board of directors for the National Association of Peer Supporters, and just to be transparent, we recently had a name change. We were the International Association, and we've since sort of reassessed the scope of the work that we're doing, and although we'll still have alliances with global efforts in peer support, we have changed our name again to the National Association of Peer Supporters. So I just wanted to call that out, lest there be any confusion. And so we were founded in 2004, and in 2013, we published the National Practice Guidelines for Peer Specialists. And more recently, in 2019, we launched the National Practice Guidelines for Supervisors of Peer Support Specialists. The mission of INAPS, and we're still calling ourselves INAPS, even though we're national, is to grow the peer support profession by promoting the inclusion of peer specialists throughout healthcare and other community systems worldwide. I'd like to share that our 14th annual conference will be held in Baton Rouge, Louisiana on October 19th through 21st. And in our follow-up materials to this webinar, I'll make sure that I give that information and relevant links to the organizers. This is a wonderful conference. It's affordable. If you start saving now, it won't be a strain, but it's really great to meet up with peer specialists throughout the nation and also peer specialists who come from other countries. And we will also be opening up a call for proposals. And one of the things that we really strive to do is to invite people who may have not presented before and really help to groom new presenters to share their experiences and materials in workshops. So that's going to be October 19th through 21st. One of the other things that I just want to mention briefly, and at the risk of sounding self-promoting, but relevant to the topic of peer support and empowerment, is I have had the opportunity to complete my doctoral program, which, as I mentioned in my intro, Hope and peer support have really helped me to achieve. And so I'm in the process of preparing to defend a dissertation in the next few months, and my research really looks at job satisfaction among peer support staff working in mental health treatment settings and recovery-oriented systems. And I'm really looking at how social support, organizational support, supervisor support, and empowerment impact job satisfaction. I'm also doing a little bit of exploratory research in terms of how supervisor attributes, for example, age, the length of time supervising, race and ethnicity, sexual identity, and professional background of supervisors influence the peer support staff's experience of supervision. So I had a lot of support from the peer support community in getting a survey out over the summer, and I especially want to thank Celia and other people for helping me get that survey out. And, you know, it's research that I'm doing, but it's really about community, because we had 645 people respond to the survey. And so I'm really looking forward to sharing the results about how people experience job satisfaction and how those factors weigh on that experience, and to also identify and to share people's experiences about what they consider meaningful in their roles as peer specialists. So I did a small qualitative portion to the research so that we can really learn about what peers find to be most meaningful in their roles. So that's just some of the stuff that I'm doing, and I want to again thank the organizers, and just to also once again call out, you know, the whole idea around privilege is that, like, many of us have that to be at the table and to have a voice. And one of the things that I'm trying to be more intentional about is to try to promote those opportunities for other individuals who may not be at the table, because, you know, peer support at its origin is around non-hierarchy, it's about mutuality, it's about equity. And sometimes in doing the work and succeeding and getting opportunities, it's very easy to forget about community and focus on individual as we're trying to pursue a lot of different goals. So for myself, that's really one of the themes that's resonating with me today. Particularly as we close out the month of celebrating Black history, which is actually another tragedy, because Black history shouldn't have to be celebrated within 1 month, but we're also going to move the needle on how that's looked at. So I look forward to answering some questions and furthering the dialogue in this webinar, and I'm really looking forward to hearing my colleague Bronwyn, who's going to share next.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good work. I can't wait to see your paper. I'm so happy to introduce Bronwyn Franklin. She was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. She grew up on the northwest side of Detroit. She comes from a family of multi-generational trauma survivors. For over 20 years, she had been misdiagnosed as manic depressive. In 1977, during a manic episode, she committed a crime that was sentenced, and she was sentenced to 10 years in prison. She was released in 2007. Later that year, she was hired as a peer support specialist in Detroit. After becoming a certified peer support specialist, Bronwyn went on to assist in developing health and wellness programs, aftercare outreach programs, and workshops in the city of Detroit as a certified peer support specialist. She also provided many workshops and training. She's received numerous awards and recognition for her work in Detroit. In 2012, she moved to Oregon to help build a program and train peer wellness specialists in Portland. She's continued working with the houseless population, training and delivering workshops on peer support skills in health and wellness. Bronwyn recently presented at the International Prisoners Family Conference in Dallas, Texas, and Rethinking Psychiatry in Portland, and works with families in the wraparound program. I'm pleased to introduce Bronwyn Franklin, my friend and my colleague and my comrade, to you. Here's Bronwyn.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, fellow panelists. And I'd like to thank the National Coalition for Mental Health and Recovery for hosting this webinar. It's truly amazing. So Jen talked about it, and I am a trainer, and I've done a lot of training. So I'd like to just kind of take you on a brief journey and share some numbers with you. So follow me for just a second and listen. And see if you can pick up the isms that have affected one person's life journey and how it intersects. So create a picture in your mind and see how you can propel this, how this person is propelled into a life of despair and hopelessness. So we've been talking a lot about the racism and prison and mental health. So some of my presentations lately have been on the fact of our mental health population being in prison. So currently in the United States, there are 2.3 million people incarcerated in prisons in the United States alone. And the last statistics that I was able to find was from the U.S. Bureau of Justice, and it comes from 2006, which is too far back. But it says at least 50% of the people incarcerated have a altered mental state of being. So somewhere along the line, they have some sort of mental health diagnosis. So I can continue to dig into this a little further, and I've seen a statistic that said this, and this spoke to something one of the other panelists spoke about, is if you were born in the year 2001, that places you somewhere around 19 years old. So you are more likely, if you are a Black man, to go to prison. 1 in every 3 Black men will go to prison who are 19 years old. 1 in 6 Latino men, but 1 in 17 white men. Black women, 1 in 18 Black women will go to prison at the age, if they're at the age of 19 today. Latino women, 1 in 45. White women, 1 in 111. These statistics come from the Bureau of Justice. There are 1.2 million people with mental health concerns in just these 6 states alone: Alabama, Arkansas, Mississippi, Texas, Georgia, and Florida. Those 6 states are in the top 10 to have the worst mental health treatment inside the prison systems. The disparities in the number for people being sentenced to prison is another huge disparity. You have just this morning, I seen an article where the Commission on Civil Rights said that they did a public hearing and a year-long investigation that said women in prison receive harsher punishment for things they do in prison than men do. But here's another piece. Men who kill their female partners may end up with 2 to 6 years, but a woman who may kill her male partner gets on an average of 15 years in prison. Several of these statistics have been tracked back by many, many studies that show that there is prosecutional biases in the decisions that's being made around the sentencing and the pleas when it comes to Black men and women and people who have mental health challenges. We are being locked up at a higher rate. That's pushing this 2 million people incarcerated. 50% have a mental health diagnosis. That's just crazy. Excuse me, didn't mean that word. So just listen to my story. I was a 37-year-old Black woman with 3 kids who worked a full-time, well-paying job, and I was a homeowner. And I had suffered from mental health conditions since I was about 13, but the diagnosis had been major depression. So the last episode happened in 1997, and I was put on Prozac. And after months of still not feeling better, and I was at the highest doses of Prozac, I do like many of us do. I stopped taking it. Mania kicked in. But the undiagnosed behavior was so familiar to me. So for 4 months, I was in a manic state, and I was spiraling down until one night I came home, and then there was a physical altercation with my partner. He almost died that night. Here's where I get in with the plea deals. They offered me a plea for 5 to 10, and I took that. But the judge had the right to come in and say, no, we're going to give you 10 to 20. I had no prior record. This happened in March of 1999. No one assessed any of the trauma on my background, so nobody looked at what we call our ACEs scores, adverse childhood experience scores. Nobody looked at that. No one looked at my mental health history. No one looked at the domestic violence. So in 2007, I was released. I had 5 strikes against me walking out that prison door. I was a Black woman, racism. I was a woman, sexism. I had a mental health diagnosis, so I was broken. I was a felon. And I was middle age, which is ageism. In baseball, you get 3 strikes, but I had 5. They told me that this was the end, but I said, no, not yet. So you've heard some of the things I've done since my release, some of the trainings that I've done. I am a trainer. I'm a trainer. I have trained peer support specialists. I have continued to speak out against the disparities that come against that has come against me as a woman, me as a Black woman, and me as a person with a mental health challenge, and I constantly have gone out to prove that I'm not broken. I still have rights, and I'm going to get those rights if I can. So the fight continues. In our country, things won't change because all these isms that I talked about, they are rooted in the same thing. They're rooted in separation and segregation. And it comes from a cultural eliteness. And when we put labels on things as a society, and it becomes political. So I think in order to survive this, we need to have more self-awareness, more self-love, and build a community of unity in order to survive. So empowering one another, we can move forward in making things better for those to come. So that's kind of all I have for you today. And I want to thank everybody for being on the call and listening.
Thank you, Bronwyn. That was lovely to hear you share so much, and I learned so much about you as an activist and your social justice work. Thank you so much. At this point, we're going to dialogue amongst ourselves here.
I think Celia.
Go ahead, Oryx. Celia, go ahead.
No. Jen, I wanted you to go back to the memes, sorry, about calling the police to show people what we developed. Yes. Can you talk about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Lauren Tenney, for developing these memes. On the left side of the screen, on the left side of the slide, you'll see 10 things that you can do today to work towards eliminating racism. And on the right, you'll see 5 ideas for safety from the police for people who have a psychiatric history. And I'm not going to go through this whole thing and read it to you, but taking a look at the highlights, please stop calling 911 for supposed psychiatric mental health reasons. Talk to your friend, talk to your family member, talk to your wife, your partner, your husband, your friends, anybody that you trust, and seek help. They will listen, and because more than not, often times they've been there themselves, and I can tell you I've been there myself. And stop the psychiatric profiling. Fix the problem at the source, not at the crisis point. And Bronwyn was talking about the numbers of women that are in jails and incarcerated because of for domestic violence, for violence, for expressing self-harm. And I'll vouch for that. I've seen that here at South County, Fulton, at the women's jail, where they are sleeping in film, and it's a horrible situation. It has since been investigated, and I think the investigation is ongoing. stop the racism, stop the misogyny, homophobia, the transphobia, the classist, and other structural oppression in mental health policies and practice. One of the big things I like about Surviving Race and why I continue to volunteer with the group is because we're a group together, and we understand fair treatment, and not only fair treatment, but we understand exceptional love and care and support for one another, and recognizing who we are. Get the facts before anything's going on, and Valman, it breaks my heart to hear about what happened to you. A known or assumed psychiatric history will increase the risk of somebody getting killed by the police, and please just, you don't have to call 911, just reach out to someone that you trust and talk to someone that you love, because they love you too, and they understand. So this is Surviving Race puts out an awful lot of tremendous, very effective graphics, and so if you or your organization would like to work with us or any of these things, we have them all here. So that's primarily it. So thank you, Lauren, for putting those together, and Celia.
If I could jump in for a second, this is Oryx. Thank you so much for this. And people may be wondering about alternatives to calling the police. And so I posted a link for everyone. One alternative that we at the National Coalition recommend highly is emotional CPR. So it's a way to be with someone and help someone through a crisis rather than, having to call someone else. Leads to further interventions. So I just posted that link for folks.
Although not all of us support that. I just want to be clear. Not all of us support that. Sorry.
Oryx, thanks for posting that. And Lauren, I hear what you're saying. It's interesting in my crisis work. That's what I practice. I was trained with emotional CPR in Fort Worth, Texas, back in 2012 with Dan Fisher, and who I count as being a very important colleague, and in developing emotional CPR, because it works. It's mutual. It's heart to heart. You're basically just listening and acknowledging, and you're hearing, and you're giving voice to the trauma that man caused, the pain that you're experiencing. So thanks, Oryx.
Thanks, Oryx, Jen, and Lauren. I just want to say too that I think part of doing of having this is that we get this out to the general community. Like some of us go to community events and to churches and to faith-based organizations, and a lot of them don't even know any of us or any of our organizations exist. And it would be good to let them know you don't have to call the police as a first response. There are other kinds of ways that you can help the loved one that's having an emotional challenge. So I think that's what we really also want to get out there to families that don't know about us, don't know about the National Coalition, don't know about Surviving Race, so we can be intersected into the community. I'll stop there. Thank you.
And peer respite and peer supports is certainly key. And at this point, it's a lot of living in this climate is self-preservation. And so just reach out and talk to and listen to the person asking you to listen to them and where they're at.
So at this point, thank you, Jen. We want to get into a dialogue with all of us together with Jonathan and Borwin, me, Jen, and Lauren. Any of you have some questions or just some comments?
Yeah, Jonathan, when you were talking about NAPS, I know it as NAPS and also INAPS, and Steve Harrington changed my life. I love Steve Harrington. And Steve is one of the primary people that helped put NAPS on the map. And he's lovely. He's a wonderful human being. And thank you for bringing in NAPS. And I'm looking forward to the conference in October.
And Jen, thank you so much for bringing up Steve Harrington's name that I did not mention. But yes, he and his partner were the original founders, and there was a small group of advocates in Michigan, and that's where they started in 2004. And then they had a small board of directors, and they began to enlist or invite members from other states, and then grew to the point where every state was represented, plus several countries outside of the United States. So that's really exciting that you're coming. And I'd like for us to try to get the word out there more, because I know personally, and I take full responsibility for saying this, is that my experience in going to certain conferences is that I don't see many people who look like myself. And I know that, being a board member of INAPS and knowing that we are being very, very intentional about making sure that INAPS is accessible and available to everyone who is a peer support person or a peer support ally. But I think getting this information out to different communities that may not ordinarily hear about it is very, very important. And that's my personal mission as a board member, to make sure that more persons of color and other groups that oftentimes get overlooked know about these opportunities and can prepare accordingly to be a part of and to attend.
Yeah, NAPS is fantastic. I remember the conference. It was in San Diego, I think, in 2014, and it was really great. It's a fantastic opportunity to meet with your friends again, see your friends again, meet colleagues that you haven't met, and to go to excellent presentations. And so I didn't know, I didn't recall that the dates were in October, Jonathan, so it's on my calendar at this point. And where is it going to be at? What city?
In Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and we were in San Diego last. Yeah.
Wow, awesome. Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Not too far from Georgia.
So when that opens,
thank you, Jonathan.
When the room block opens, people can start making arrangements to, room together. We try to keep those hotel rates really affordable, and the rooms are generally nice in the hotels that we stay at. So, like 2 people can room and make it really, cost effective for them.
So thank you, Jonathan. I ditto what Jen said. NAPS is amazing organization, and I attended a NAPS conference early on in my peer career, like in 2009 in Arizona, and I met a lot of great people, and I met the person that was responsible for bringing me to Portland at that NAPS conference, and I've been following Steve and the conference for years, so it is amazing. So I look forward to going to Baton Rouge this year, which is close to my roots. So that would be awesome. Can't wait for the information to come out.
Great. I just want to say that it's still called INAPS, even though it's not international, it's a national association. Lauren, do you have any questions or comments for anything you want to say?
I want to thank everybody for sharing what they have and for participating. I think, though, that, maybe I'm on the far left here, but I think it's really important that we continue to hold organizations that have been known to be misogynistic and racist in their practices, or not outright supporting the Black Lives Matter and other kinds of social actions, responsible for what they're doing. And Surviving Race has had a lot of conversations about what we actively support and don't support, and where do or don't. And I think it's really important that people understand that part of what our real message isn't about going to some program. It's about that there is a fraud in psychiatry, that there is something that psychiatry can do to solve this. And the idea that police somehow have the legitimacy to go in and be part of that pickup process where people wind up getting killed. And I think that it's not about as much of the alternatives of what to do if not calling 911. It's getting the message across that when you call 911, what you're doing is you're calling in a state-sponsored gun. The only difference between a police officer and somebody who's not a police officer in that situation is that they have a gun, and that gun is often used against us, and disproportionately against people of color. And I think that that is a big piece of the take-home message. I don't think that I can sit through this without fully acknowledging that there are major issues in the national organizations concerning sexual harassment and misogyny and transphobia and racism and all other kinds of oppression and discrimination aimed at people. And while that's not the focus of this, I don't think that we can pretend that that's not part of what's happening and that things need to be seriously reorganized and addressed. And so I just want to really reiterate that, and that things like, well, I mean, I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Any other, and wanna?
Yeah, I just want to, Lauren, thanks a lot. That was really great. One of the things that Surviving Race that we're talking about doing is growing leadership and growing it from within, and so that we can do more together and be more representative, because white privilege does exist, and there is a lot of misogyny, and there is a lot of stuff that might be taking place within the organizations themselves, or we have to go and we have to do some transformative work. And I think we can, I know we can, and we're doing it right now. So one of the things I just want to put out there is that Surviving Race is talking about putting together a mentoring for leadership, and we're also in the plans for a 2021 dialogues and retreat in the city of Atlanta. So it's going to be held here in the South, which I think is totally appropriate and an excellent place for it to be. And we'll talk more about that, I think, as we go along. So, yeah, Lauren, I hear you.
Brorwin, I just want to thank you for your story. I'm hoping that other people heard it. I'm sorry. I always just feel bad when stuff happens to Black women. Like you said, there was 5 strikes against you instead of 3.
Yeah. Thank you, Celia and Jen, because Jen mentioned it when she was speaking earlier, and I didn't get a chance to get in. There's nothing to be sorry about, because what I believe is some things happen, and they're not always good things happen. And it used to be a quote, bad things happen to good people, but it changed my life. It saved my life, because prior to getting a proper diagnosis, I had several attempts. I was just all over the place because I'd been misdiagnosed, but once I got on the right track, it changed my life, because I saw the fact that because I had these things against me, I needed to fight so that this didn't happen to other people, that other people didn't have to suffer like that, including my children. I had a son that was diagnosed. He wasn't diagnosed. He went to prison, but he was never diagnosed, and they released him, and he became homeless. And I'm not to get any sympathy behind this, but he was murdered on the street, and it wasn't by the police. It was by another Black kid. Unfortunately, he never got help. And I fight each day so that I can get the message out. We can get the message out that our lives matter, and we deserve the help. We deserve to not be caught up in this elitism of these cultures and these isms, and moving forward. And the way I see us doing that is unity. We have to come together, which is what I see this organization doing, coming together and moving forward and getting the information out there, because people are uninformed. Calling the police, that's not helpful. I agree. You know, when you have a person in a mental health crisis, we all know that peer support can talk to a person and bring them down because of the mutuality. You know, we don't bring in that hierarchy of authority with guns and badges. You know, to be able to bring somebody who has some needs. Because when we're acting out in these behaviors, it's because there's unmet needs. There's something I need that I'm not getting, and you're not hearing me. And if you come in with authority and a badge and a gun, you're not hearing me. You come in there with an agenda. And unfortunately, people are dying because nobody's listening. So bring in the peer supports, bring in the respites, give people a place to be heard. So, you know, it happened to me, but it saved my life. It changed me. It made me a better person, and I'm stronger for it. And I just refuse to accept those 5 strikes, those 5 labels, in the isms.
Yes, thank you so much, Borwin, and I hope we can all work with you and everyone else to really change this with police, really pushing more peer support, more human rights out there, I think is very
Absolutely.
important.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I think, Oryx, should we open up for questions?
Sure, yeah. So I'll read the questions, and a reminder that you can use the question function on your control panel to ask a question or make a comment. And so we have a couple of questions that came in for Lauren. One of the questions is, what is an example of a position that one would be asked to step down from? And the other one was, you mentioned not supporting emotional CPR. What do you recommend instead?
I mean, I guess I have to say, with everything that was said, I can't believe this is what the questions are. And so, like I said, I don't recommend ECPR. I think that there are a lot of issues across the board, and we do offer recommendations like reaching out to a family member or a friend, or having some other alternative available to you. But for people not to call the police, and to be aware that if you call the police, you're calling in a gun. The other question in terms of what the boycott was, it was specific to the Alternatives Conference. And we wanted to see that the Alternatives Conference was representative of people who were actually receiving services. And so that's what we asked people to do. And either stepping down or making room, but one way or the other, if you've been in power for a long period of time, and you're a person that has privilege, if you're a white male or a white woman, or somebody who has been, actively doing this for a long time, to make room for other people to, in the words of Jackie McKinney and others, get to the front of the room. And so I think that this is part of what it is we're doing. But I think that it's very important that we take really reflective time to look at the organizations that we're part of, and whether or not those organizations are really representative of the people that we say that we're representing and who we are, and whether or not people of color are in leadership roles inside of these organizations. And if organizations are supporting misogyny or transphobia or homophobia or religious oppression or racism, or gendered kind of thinking, then we need to hold ourselves accountable. And I think that that's the bottom line. And I think that the more people who are speaking out, and the more white people who are speaking out about the way racism plays out inside of the movement and inside of society, the more they will be able to hold other white people and people of privilege accountable. And people need to be held accountable. And this has been going on for decades. And women in this movement have been talking about men in this movement being oppressive and misogynistic and outright like sexually harassing people for decades. And for decades, it's been getting ignored. And the same with racist practices. And we need to be celebrating people and simultaneously holding people accountable. And when people are making strides to incorporate these kinds of activities and anti-racist kinds of actions, we need to support them. And so that was the other part of the, we have a meme of like 11 things you could do today to end racism. And so, practicing those things, I think is part of what it is we need to do. And a big part of it is by starting and looking at this very white, often very male-led movement that repeatedly has had these kinds of issues come up in it, and to start holding ourselves accountable minimally to Title IX.
Thanks, Lauren. Well said. The next question, unless anybody else on the panel want to follow up with that, or want to go on to the next question?
No, I think we go on to the next question so we have time.
Okay. What about disparities for people of color? How many go to jail or get killed rather than to the hospital? I think Bronwyn addressed some of this, but if you have any follow-up to it.
Yeah, do you want to address that? Because I know you talked about that in your talk.
Bronwyn, are you on mute?
Yes, here I am. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah, the terminology, when I look at the terminology, people of color, to me, that's placing us, that's taking away our individuality. So when I speak, and I spoke about it, I broke it down, because people of color, our life experiences are different. My experience as a Black woman or Black people are different from people who come originally from Africa, or Hispanic people, or Latino people. We're all different. So I like to identify it like that. I like to break it out. So the disparities of people such as Black people and Latinos, I did kind of mention that. Black people, men and women, are more likely to go to prison than white men and women, and Latinos are the second highest. So as far as mental health, both of those populations of Hispanics and Blacks, we have a hard time seeking mental health treatment. So we more than likely end up in hospitals, or we are killed, because we have a trust issue. The system has, for decades, centuries, mistreated us and indigenous people as well. So we don't trust the system. So we don't go get psychiatric help. We just don't do it. It's hard. So that's another reason why I speak and I do the things I do, because I want people to know that it's okay, but we still have to be self-aware, and in peer support, we empower. So that makes it a little easier for people to seek help. But most people end up in jail that are of diverse races, or they end up killed by the police because they're in crisis and they didn't get help. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, there's a follow-up comment from the same person that says,
okay,
Native American men and women also have similar rates of incarceration and police killing to African American, but often getting taken out of the data because the numbers are small. This impacts the services for Native Americans, as the need is not being identified, and makes the Native community invisible to others, creating a triple disparity.
And I get that, and as I've been doing this research and looking into this person is somewhat correct. What has happened is they've even separated out the data and information for people that are Native American men and women, because they've taken it and they've isolated it onto the individual reservations. Because even in some of the work that I did, I seen where they had what they call the Indian country prisons and jails. So they have, and they don't get, and the federal government doesn't do any type of research around the Bureau of Justice to give out that information. So I believe the numbers are higher than what we know, but it's so kept in by our government and kept into the reservation populations. It's again segregation, separation. But I believe it's out there from what I've seen and what I've gathered, but it's hard to find.
Thanks,
So I
Bronwyn.
hope.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
I was going to say, I was just going to say, I hope that spoke to that person, and if they reach out later on, and we can have more dialogue, I'm willing to talk and
Wonderful.
research this more.
Great.
By the way,
Thank you.
Thank
By
you.
the way, we have thank yous coming in. Affirmations are always nice. Some folks thanking Lauren for her words. And next question. Hello from Washington State. Laura Van Tosh here. Forced treatment and revising involuntary commitment laws is on the rise. Clearly, homeless people will be targeted for lack of a better way of putting it. What are the thoughts of the panelists about how to address this growing trend?
This is Jen. Laura, thanks for being on the call. When we were talking on the last Surviving Race call, I didn't know that there was a bill that was up right now, and I'm interested in finding out what the status is on that. But it's terrible. I think they are profiling, they are scapegoating, and they are trying to do everything that they possibly can to put people that are shelterless, that are homeless, away. And if that I think that is a target of the bill. I do. I think it's very clear. The trends are going to are nationwide. I think what you're seeing in the state of Washington is what's happening everywhere. Atlanta has a significant problem issue, quote unquote, with people that are on the streets, and they're largely black, they're largely male, they're largely women, younger, or they're brought in from the rural regions into the city of Atlanta. And I see this trend continuing. It's a dangerous trend. I think we need to do something about this, and we need to get control of it now. That's my opinion.
Hi, Laura Van Tosh. I just wanted to make a small comment. We're having the issue with homelessness in New York City, and there are some plans to help, but I don't think it is, some of it is to get people into shelters or get them into hospitals. I really think that we need sort of, maybe Surviving Race can do this, is we need some kind of planning committee, because I would like to talk to other people to figure out strategies on how to stop the target of homeless people, lack of a better word, from being placed in forced treatment. So that's what I would recommend. I think we need to talk about this more, so all of us are not acting alone in our different states. This is a really huge issue around the country.
I'm also curious, this is Jonathan, about peer support efforts in terms of outreaching to people who are homeless. I mean, I understand that there aren't a lot of peers doing work in homeless services, but I don't know if that's actually true. I'm looking at a very limited geographic area, but I think that could help to, shift that trend a little bit, because if we're dependent on, sort of traditional authorities to address the situation, then as they say, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got. So I think possibly, looking at how, peers could be more involved in engaging people who are currently, in homeless status.
Thank you. I wanted to kind of being
Okay.
that I am right now working with an organization that is working with the houseless population, and we just put on peer support as interns, giving them like fresh out of their peer support training, the opportunity to start working with people who are houseless. I also agree with what Celia was saying is, and that's kind of what I've been keep bringing up as a community. We need to unite. We need to just not be siloed because the separation keeps us in the isms. And forced voluntary commitment is just not the answer to helping people who are with houses. It goes back to basic human rights. You know, we all have a right to shelter, and because of corporate greed and our cultural elitism, people are there's plenty of abandoned homes throughout this country. We have more homes abandoned than we have people on the street. That it doesn't. It goes back to corporate greed. So I just kind of wanted to go into that and address Jonathan, that we are starting here in Oregon. It's just one little organization, but we're putting peer support in there.
So thank you, Gordon. We have one more question. Oryx, did you want to?
Yeah, there's a couple more questions.
Okay.
There's a
Can
comment.
we address them?
Yeah,
Or-
yeah, that's, I'll ask the questions. So
Okay, go ahead.
Laura followed up with a comment about the memes. Also, memes have to be made accessible for people with vision issues. Thank you for looking into this, please. More of a comment. And then a question. Has anyone ever created a crisis support team that is pure peer support and that would not coerce anyone into a hospital? Interested in everyone who has experience with peer support responding.
This idea. Yes, we need that. No, I haven't seen it. I don't see how that's going to be possible in the current models of crisis intervention. I really don't see how that's going to happen. There has to be transformative internal systemic change to understand the importance of the role of the peer. Like Ronna was saying, you know, we all have a right to shelter. I think there should be specialized endorsements for peers who are excellent at crisis intervention, and also in housing and shelterless and working specifically with more of the disenfranchised populations. And I think we all are at this point who are being profiled, being targeted. Endorsements are certainly what the states can do right now in 2020 to create specific certified peer specialist endorsements to address this. And at that point,
I also see policy changes. I think that is a barrier in getting a lot of peer work done, especially pure peer work. I hear you talking. That's my term, because we are becoming more co-opted in the system, and it's because of so many policies are set up where it becomes a barrier. So we have been bending to be able to get around those policies, but in the midst of it, we're losing our pureness. And I've seen that happen right here in the state of Oregon, where certain things we were trying to do as a peer coalition, we were running into policy, state policy, and state administrative rules. But we can do this if we band together and get some of that changed. So now that's what I see.
Yeah, if
right.
this is Oryx, if I could just jump in on this one, because I have a lot of experience in this area. And I think this question of pure peer support is very interesting, because to me, that really only happens outside of an organization, in the community, when we are supporting each other as true friends and neighbors and community. And I've seen that happen, and I've been a part of that a lot, actually. But I think the moment that you are paying someone to be in a relationship, even if it's a peer specialist and all the best intentions, then that brings a huge question of whether that peer support is pure or not. The closest that I've seen is with the AFIA Peer Respite, to give a shout out to the Western Mass Recovery Learning Community. I think they've done a great job with the AFIA Peer Respite, but I think it's a good question, and thanks for asking it. Anybody else wanted to comment before we move on to the next question?
The topic of, I really wish there was an opportunity to be pure as a peer supporter. You know, the reason why I got my initial certification is because I wasn't working. I was on disability. I was sick. I was on my knees, and everybody in Atlanta and Austin was telling me, "Hey, Jen, if you get your CPS, you can get a job." Well, look at all the people that have gotten jobs since then. Look at the peer workforce in the U.S. Look at it outside of the U.S. It's tremendous. It's not going to be stopped, but the question of pureness, or you're saying that a lot of it does take place outside of organizations, and that's the truth. You know, so I guess what I would encourage the people who are policymakers and have the ability to make a change truly transformatively in mental health and substance use and behavioral health and integration today is to figure out a way that we're not co-opted and we're not case managers and we're not just the clinician's assistant.
Thanks. The next question is there any legislation, local, state, or federal, that we can support that addresses these issues?
Yeah, go to your state oversight who does your CPS in your state. That's the first place to begin. You know, everybody that's gotten in this business has gotten in with a golden heart and a true heart and a real heart with real intention and with real meaning. But we all know what happens to that when you're in a position of power, and especially depending upon what you're doing and how much you're getting paid an hour. The average pay I saw a couple of years ago was $12. In Atlanta, the average pay for a certified peer specialist is now $18 an hour. So I would encourage you, whatever state you're in, is to contact your oversight body that's doing your CPS and say, hey, you know, this is something we really need to address. And then, of course, take it one step farther and take it up to SAMHSA and say, look at these codes, look at these principles, look at these competencies. What can we do from inside us to change this? Because it does need to change. There's a lot of good that we do, but there's a lot of stuff there's a lot more that we can do if we keep the real intention and why we got into this work in the first place. It's not just a paycheck anymore.
Yeah, these really good questions keep coming in. So the next question is, wonder about rejecting police but accepting a diagnosis done based on perspective of hierarchy, and kind of the issue of the violence of the mental health system, diagnostic treatment system. If there's any responses to that.
I don't understand the perspective of hierarchy. Does that mean the system, psychiatry? But the problem is that the police have been the go-to for everything, and including mental health. And they really shouldn't be the go-to, because they're not helping the situation when they go into a loved one's home and that person may, in their eyes, acting different or coming at them with a knife or whatever. And so your response is to shoot them dead. No, don't shoot them in the leg or whatever. I don't think they should be shot at all, but you know, the police are afraid of their life, but then that person loses their life. So to me, we got to focus on that issue. Any other people have any panelists have any?
Here's an important comment that came in. Please share that Trans Lifeline is a peer support resource for trans and gender non-conforming people by trans and gender non-conforming people that will never initiate non-consensual active quote-unquote rescue. They will only call emergency services if that is what you ask for.
So thank you for that. I don't have that. I would like to have that hotline, but thank you for letting us know.
Trans Lifeline.
Trans Lifeline. Okay.
Now, we may not be able to get everybody's, they're coming in fast and furious now.
Okay. What can we do about that, Oryx? Should you get the questions and send it to us, or how does that work?
Yeah, I could collect questions and send them to you. Or actually, a better idea I think would be to email these. If your question has not been addressed, we'll go to the last couple slides.
Okay.
Then you can email Surviving Race, and they will respond.
Right. Thank you. So thank you so much. This has been an informative, wonderful webinar. Thanks everyone who was able to be on the webinar today, and thank you to the panelists. I want to thank Oryx Cohen, Dan Fisher, and Eugene Shelley and the National Coalition on Mental Health Recovery in hosting this national webinar celebrating Black History Month 2020. We're also very grateful to your dedication to surviving race in multiple ways. Thank you. Jen?
I just want to.
Oh, go ahead, Jen. There was a question that came in about phone number. I'm not sure what phone number people are missing. This is the email for Surviving Race right here. Also, there will be a survey right after the webinar. If you took a few minutes just to fill out the survey afterwards, we'd appreciate it. The survey will also be emailed to you. But I'll turn it back over to Jen.
I just want to thank you again to all the panelists and to Oryx and to the National Coalition on Mental Health Recovery and to Surviving Race for being there for me. I'm a queer woman of color, and I wanted to thank the person that questioned and just gave the information about the trans line. Thank you so much. If you need to reach us, emailing is the best way to reach us. We're all over the place. So Surviving Race 2014 at gmail.com. Thanks again.
And Jen, I want to say, hopefully, maybe in the future, I know we've had some issues with people coming onto the webinar, the link. We would like to have a Surviving Race Part 2 of this webinar at some point. So hopefully that can happen in the near future. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.